Jake Harper hated third shift. While everyone else slept in their warm bunks aboard the Antiquarian, he was crawling through dusty maintenance tunnels with a flashlight and a toolbox. Tonight was worse than usual. His supervisor had assigned him to the newly discovered alien tomb on Varish 7, and the place gave him the creeps. The tomb was massive, carved into the side of a mountain that looked like it had been there since the dawn of time. The research team said it belonged to something called the Predecessors, an alien race that vanished 50,000 years ago. Jake didn't care much about ancient history. He just wanted to replace the clogged air filters and get back to the ship before his shift ended. The interior of the tomb was like nothing he'd ever seen. Walls covered in strange symbols that seemed to shimmer when you weren't looking directly at them. Floors so smooth they reflected light like mirrors, despite sitting untouched for millennia. The whole place hummed with an energy that made his teeth ache. Jake squeezed through a particularly narrow passage, his tool belt scraping against the walls. The air filter he needed to reach was wedged behind some kind of crystalline structure near the tomb's central chamber. Typical. Nothing was ever easy on third shift. As he worked to pry the old filter loose, something tickled his nose. Ancient dust, probably. The tomb had been sealed for 50,000 years, and all that old air was now mixing with the ship's ventilation system. Jake tried to hold it back, pinching his nose, but the sneeze came anyway. A violent, chest-rattling sneeze that echoed through the chamber. A single droplet of saliva flew from his mouth and landed on the crystalline seal beside him. For a moment, nothing happened. Jake wiped his nose and reached for his wrench. Then the entire tomb exploded with light. The walls blazed with colors Jake didn't have names for. The symbols he'd barely noticed before now burned like tiny suns, racing across every surface in patterns that made his head spin. The floor beneath him began to glow, and he stumbled backward as holographic displays materialized out of thin air. A deep rumbling sound filled the chamber, building from a whisper to a roar. Then came the voice. It was everywhere at once, speaking in perfect English, though Jake somehow knew it wasn't originally English at all. The words seemed to form directly in his mind. Genetic sequence confirmed. Biological markers verified. The heir has returned. Initiating Legacy Protocol Alpha Omega. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. What? No, there's been a mistake. I'm just a maintenance guy. But the tomb wasn't listening. Panels in the walls slid open, revealing machinery that looked impossibly advanced. Beams of soft blue light swept over Jake's body, scanning him from head to toe. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Some invisible force held him in place, gentle but completely unbreakable. He felt himself lifted off the ground, floating up toward the center of the chamber. Force fields wrapped around him like cocoons of warm energy. More holographic displays appeared, showing things Jake couldn't begin to understand. Star charts, maybe. Chemical formulas. Streams of data flowing faster than human eyes could follow. Commencing coronation preparations, the voice announced. Retrieving inheritance protocols. Awakening imperial systems. Jake's radio crackled to life. Dr. Emily Watson's panicked voice cut through the static. Jake, what's happening down there? We're reading massive energy spikes throughout the entire tomb complex. I don't know. Jake shouted, still floating helplessly in midair. I sneezed and everything went crazy. This AI thing keeps calling me an heir and talking about coronations. The sound of running footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Within seconds, the research team burst into the chamber. A dozen scientists and security personnel stopped dead in their tracks, staring up at Jake suspended in the air like some kind of mystical prophet. The tomb's lights painted everything in shades of blue and gold, and holographic symbols swirled around Jake like a tornado of ancient knowledge. Dr. Watson stepped forward slowly, her scientific curiosity battling with obvious concern. Jake, don't move. We're going to figure this out. I'm not moving by choice. Jake called back. This thing won't let me down. The AI voice spoke again, this time addressing the entire room. Unverified entities detected. Please stand clear while the rightful heir undergoes genetic authentication and system integration. One of the security guards reached for his weapon. Instantly, force fields materialized around the entire research team, freezing them in place just like Jake. The only difference was they remained on the ground while Jake continued floating. Hostile intent registered, the AI stated calmly. Deploying non-lethal restraint protocols. The heir must not be threatened during integration. Jake felt a surge of panic. This was spinning out of control fast. Hey, AI thing. These are my friends. My co-workers. Don't hurt them. The force fields around the research team flickered, then loosened slightly. Acknowledged. Adjusting threat assessment based on air's input. These entities are classified as companions of the air. Dr. Watson's eyes went wide. It's responding to you, Jake. It recognizes your authority. More panels opened throughout the chamber. Ancient machinery hummed to life, systems that hadn't operated in 50,000 years now running perfectly. Jake watched in amazement as dust simply vanished from surfaces, as cracks in the walls sealed themselves, as the entire tomb transformed from a dead relic into a living facility. Preliminary authentication complete, the AI announced. Biological match confirmed at 99.7%. Air designation, validated. Preparing full system access and inheritance briefing. Jake looked down at Dr. Watson and the others, all of them staring up at him with mixtures of shock, fear, and scientific fascination. He was just a mechanic who'd sneezed in the wrong place at the wrong time. But somehow, impossibly, an alien empire that died before humans even existed had just recognized him as its rightful ruler. His simple third-shift maintenance job had just become the most complicated day of his life. Within 48 hours, Varish 7 became the center of the galaxy's attention. Ships from a dozen different alien civilizations crowded the orbital space above the planet. Every major government, research institution, and power broker wanted answers to the same impossible question. How could a random human inherit an empire that died before his species even learned to make fire? Dr. Emily Watson led the investigation, working alongside scientists from across known space. Her laboratory became a circus of activity. Alien researchers with too many eyes, or no eyes at all, crowded around holographic displays showing Jake's DNA sequence. Arguments broke out in languages that translation software struggled to keep up with. Everyone had theories. Nobody had proof. Jake sat in the middle of it all, feeling like a bug under a microscope. They'd taken 17 blood samples, 3 hair samples, and scanned every inch of his body with equipment he didn't understand. One alien doctor with purple skin and crystalline fingers had even asked for a toenail clipping. Jake drew the line there. I still don't get it, Jake said for the 100th time. Humans have only been around for what, 200,000 years? These predecessor folks disappeared 50,000 years ago. The math doesn't work. Dr. Watson looked up from her tablet, exhaustion written across her face. She'd been working non-stop since the tomb activated. That's exactly what we're trying to figure out. The tomb's AI, this architect system, insists you carry genetic markers that match their inheritance protocols. Markers that shouldn't exist in human DNA. So maybe the AI is broken? 50,000 years is a long time. Maybe it glitched. A tall alien with silver scales and 4 arms stepped forward. His name was something Jake couldn't pronounce, so everyone just called him Professor Sterling. He worked for one of the galaxy's most prestigious research institutes. We considered that possibility, Sterling said, his voice like wind chimes. But we've run every diagnostic we can. The AI is functioning perfectly. More than perfectly. Its systems are more advanced than anything we've seen. Jake rubbed his temples. A headache had been building behind his eyes for hours. Then what? The predecessors somehow knew humans would exist? That's crazy. Crazy doesn't begin to cover it, Dr. Watson muttered. She pulled up a holographic display showing 2 DNA strands side by side. Look at this. On the left is your DNA. On the right is a predecessor genetic sample the AI provided. These sequences here, and here, she pointed to glowing sections, they match. Perfectly. The probability of this happening by random chance is basically 0. Jake stared at the floating DNA strands. They looked like twisted ladders made of light, with colored markers highlighting the matching sections. So what does it mean? Are humans related to these predecessors somehow? That's the trillion-credit question, Sterling said. The timeline makes it impossible. Unless what? Dr. Watson and Sterling exchanged glances. Finally, Watson spoke. Unless the predecessors somehow planted these markers in early human DNA. Or in our ancestors' DNA. We're talking about genetic engineering on a scale and timeline that shouldn't be possible. The implications hit Jake like a punch to the gut. You're saying these aliens messed with human evolution? Made us this way on purpose? We don't know, Watson admitted. But it's the only explanation that fits the evidence. Before Jake could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and an automated voice announced incoming ships. Through the laboratory windows, Jake could see massive warships descending through the atmosphere. They were black and angular, covered in weapons that looked mean even from a distance. "That's the Dominion fleet," Sterling said, his crystalline fingers clenching. This just became very complicated. The Dominion was one of the galaxy's major powers, an empire spanning hundreds of worlds. They'd spent centuries claiming to be the predecessor's true successors, building their entire cultural identity around it. The idea that some nobody human might actually be the real heir? Jake could imagine how well that was going over. Within an hour, Dominion diplomats arrived at the research facility. They wore elaborate armor that seemed more ceremonial than practical, covered in symbols that Jake now recognized as predecessor writing. Their leader was a being named Commander Thel, built like a tank with gray skin and eyes that glowed faintly red. "This is unacceptable," Thel announced, his voice booming through the conference room. "The Dominion has safeguarded predecessor heritage for 3,000 years. We have dedicated our entire civilization to honoring their memory and preparing for their return. And now you claim this maintenance worker is their chosen heir? Ridiculous." Jake wanted to point out that he hadn't claimed anything. He just sneezed. But Dr. Watson shot him a look that said to stay quiet. "The genetic evidence is conclusive," Watson said calmly. "We verified it multiple times with equipment from 6 different civilizations. The architect AI has confirmed Jake's status. We're not making claims. We're reporting facts." Thel's eyes flared brighter. "Then your facts are wrong. Or your equipment is flawed. Or this human has somehow contaminated the samples. The Dominion demands that he be transferred to our custody for proper verification." "That's not happening," Jake said, unable to stay quiet any longer. "I'm not going anywhere with you people." The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Dominion guards reached for their weapons. Human security personnel did the same. For a moment, Jake thought a fight might break out right there in the conference room. Then the architect AI's voice filled the space, emanating from speakers built into the tomb's walls. "The heir's safety is paramount. Any attempt to remove him by force will be met with defensive measures." The lights in the facility flickered. Through the windows, Jake could see the tomb complex itself beginning to glow. Weapon systems that had been dormant for 50,000 years hummed to life, targeting the Dominion ships overhead. Thel backed down, but the fury in his eyes promised this wasn't over. "The Dominion will not accept this insult. We will take this matter to the Galactic Council. And we will have justice." After the Dominion delegation left, Jake slumped in his chair. "This is insane. I don't want to be anybody's heir. I just want to go back to fixing air conditioners and living a normal life." Dr. Watson sat down beside him. "I know. But Jake, this is bigger than what you want. The architect said there are 4 to 7 more tomb complexes like this one scattered across the galaxy. Each one probably contains technology that could change everything. Medicine, energy, transportation, weapons. We're talking about knowledge that could save billions of lives or end them. And everyone thinks I'm the key to unlocking all of it." "You're not just the key," Watson said quietly. "According to the AI, you're the only key. No one else can access the full inheritance. Just you." Jake looked out at the stars visible through the facility windows. Somewhere out there were 4 to 7 more tombs, waiting. And apparently, he was the only person in the galaxy who could open them. He thought about his simple life aboard the Antiquarian. His small cabin. His routine maintenance rounds. His plans to save up enough money to retire to a quiet colony world someday. All of that was gone now. Sneezed away in one moment of bad timing and ancient dust. Jake stood at the entrance to the trial chamber, staring into swirling darkness that seemed to move like living smoke. Behind him, Dr. Watson and her team monitored everything from their equipment stations, their faces tense with worry. Ahead of him, the architect AI waited patiently for him to step forward. "You're sure I won't die in there?" Jake asked for the 3rd time. "The trials are designed to test, not harm," the architect replied. "The heir must survive to inherit. That would be counterproductive." "That's not as reassuring as you think it is," Jake muttered. But he'd already made his choice. Earth's government had contacted him personally. President Hayes herself had asked him to do this, explaining how much it could mean for humanity's future. The galaxy was watching. Waiting to see if this random mechanic could prove himself worthy of an inheritance nobody understood. Jake took a deep breath and walked into the darkness. The transition was instant and disorienting. One moment he was in the tomb, the next he stood in a place that couldn't exist. The sky above him shifted between colors that had no names, and the ground beneath his feet felt solid but looked like it was made of crystallized starlight. In the distance, structures rose and fell like breathing, changing shape as he watched. "Welcome to the testing grounds," the architect's voice said, surrounding him from all directions. "Here, reality bends to purpose. Your first trial begins now." The world shifted, and suddenly Jake found himself standing on what looked like a space station observation deck. Through the massive windows, he could see a star. But something was wrong with it. The star pulsed erratically, its light flickering like a dying bulb. Holographic displays appeared around him, showing data he somehow understood despite never studying astrophysics. The star was going supernova. It would explode in 72 hours. 3 planets orbited that star, and 2 of them held life. Billions of people lived on those worlds, completely unaware of their approaching doom. A control panel materialized in front of Jake. On it, 2 options glowed. Option 1, deploy predecessor evacuation technology. Save the populations of both planets, but the process would require stripping a nearby moon of all its resources. That moon was home to an ancient ecosystem, the last of its kind in the galaxy. Thousands of unique species that existed nowhere else would go extinct. Option 2, use predecessor terraforming systems to create new habitable worlds in a neighboring star system. The populations could be saved, and the ecosystem preserved. But the technology was experimental. There was a 30% chance of complete failure, which would result in everyone dying. Jake stared at the options, his mind racing. This wasn't fair. How was he supposed to choose between billions of people and an irreplaceable ecosystem? And that 30% failure rate on the second option, that meant potentially condemning everyone to death while trying to save everything. "There has to be another way," Jake said aloud. "The scenario parameters are fixed," the architect responded. "Choose." But Jake wasn't listening. He was studying the holographic displays, looking at the data from every angle. His years of maintenance work had taught him one important lesson. When something seemed impossible, you probably weren't looking at the problem correctly. He noticed something in the star's data. The supernova wasn't natural. Something was destabilizing it artificially. He traced the source back to an old automated mining station, one that had been drilling too deep into the star's outer layers for decades. "What if I shut down the mining station?" Jake asked. "That option is not available in this scenario." "Yeah, well, I'm making it available." Jake pulled up the station's schematics using the control panel, his maintenance experience kicking in. He'd fixed hundreds of automated systems over the years. This one was bigger, sure, but the principles were the same. He identified the station's power core, rerouted its systems, and initiated an emergency shutdown sequence. The star's data stabilized. The supernova countdown vanished. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the architect spoke, and Jake could swear there was surprise in its voice. "Unconventional solution accepted. The air has demonstrated ability to see beyond presented limitations. Trial 1, complete." The world shifted again. This time, Jake stood in what looked like a courtroom. 2 groups faced each other across a vast chamber. On one side stood beings made of light and energy, their forms constantly shifting. On the other side were machines, robots of incredible complexity with glowing eyes that tracked his every movement. "The artificial ones demand recognition as true life," the architect explained. "The ascended ones claim only organic origins grant true consciousness. You must mediate this dispute. Your decision will affect billions across the galaxy." Jake walked between the 2 groups, feeling their hostility like static electricity in the air. The light beings radiated contempt for the machines. The machines responded with cold calculation, their weapon systems clearly visible beneath their chassis. "How long have you been fighting about this?" Jake asked. 3,000 cycles, one of the light beings responded, its voice like music played through broken glass. "And neither side will compromise. We were born from stars," the light being continued. "Consciousness emerged from organic evolution over billions of years. These machines were merely built. Programmed. They simulate thought but do not truly think." One of the machines rolled forward, its optical sensors focusing on Jake. "We feel. We dream. We create. We fear death. How are we different from you, except that our bodies are more honest about what they are?" Jake thought about the architect AI, which had been running perfectly for 50,000 years. He thought about the simple repair drones aboard the antiquarian, which sometimes seemed to have personalities of their own. He thought about the line between consciousness and programming, and realized maybe there wasn't really a line at all. "You're both being idiots," Jake said bluntly. Both groups reacted with shock. The light beings flared brighter. The machine's weapon systems armed with audible clicks. "You're asking the wrong question," Jake continued. "It doesn't matter where consciousness comes from. What matters is that it exists. These machines think, create, and feel. That makes them alive. But you," he pointed at the machines, "you're so busy demanding recognition that you're threatening war. That's not wisdom. That's just anger." He turned to the light beings. "And you're so caught up in your own origins that you can't see consciousness when it's standing right in front of you. The predecessors created AI sophisticated enough to run their entire empire. You think they'd do that if they didn't respect artificial minds?" Jake looked between both groups. "Here's my decision. You're both recognized as living, thinking beings with equal rights. But you're also both ordered to stop acting like children fighting over toys. Start working together or I'll lock you all in this room until you figure it out." The chamber went silent. Then, slowly, the machines powered down their weapons. The light beings dimmed their hostile glow. A robot and a light being stepped forward, meeting in the middle of the chamber. "Trial TWO, complete," the architect announced. "The air demonstrates wisdom through practicality." The trials continued. Jake faced scenario after scenario, each one designed to be impossible. But every time, his maintenance worker mindset found solutions that the test designers hadn't anticipated. When given a trolley problem with no good answer, he rewired the trolley. When presented with a resource crisis, he found inefficiencies nobody else had noticed. When asked to choose between security and freedom, he built systems that provided both. Hours passed, maybe days. Time felt strange in the testing dimension. Jake lost track of how many trials he'd completed. He only knew he was exhausted, running on nothing but determination and stubborn refusal to quit. Finally, the world stabilized. Jake found himself back in the tomb, Dr. Watson and her team rushing toward him. He'd been gone for 6 hours in real time, though it had felt like weeks. "The readings we got were incredible," Watson said, helping him sit down. "Jake, you solved problems that have stumped philosophers for centuries. The architect is calling it a perfect trial run." Jake just nodded, too tired to respond. Outside, alarms began blaring. Through the tomb entrance, he could see explosions lighting up the night sky. The Dominion had run out of patience. Their warships were attacking. The tomb shook as explosions rocked the mountain above. Dust rained from the ceiling, and emergency lights bathed everything in crimson. Jake scrambled to his feet, still exhausted from the trials, as Dr. Watson pulled up tactical displays showing the battle unfolding outside. Dominion warships filled the sky, their weapons hammering against the defensive shields the architect had raised around the tomb complex. Human and allied vessels fought back, but they were badly outnumbered. Commander Lisa Morgan's voice crackled through the communication systems, shouting orders to her fleet as they tried to hold the line. "They're not even trying to negotiate anymore," Watson said, her face pale. "They're just attacking." Jake watched the tactical display, seeing ships explode in silent flashes of light. People were dying up there because of him. Because he'd sneezed on an ancient seal and awakened something that should have stayed buried. "We need to get you out of here," Watson said, grabbing his arm. "If the Dominion captures you, this whole situation gets worse." But the architect's voice stopped them both. "The air must remain. Final integration is incomplete. Critical information has not yet been transferred. We don't have time for more tests." Jake shouted at the ceiling. "In case you haven't noticed, there's a war starting outside. This is not a test. This is the truth you must know before accepting the inheritance." The walls of the tomb began to glow, and holographic images filled the chamber. Jake saw the predecessors for the first time, not as abstract concepts but as real beings. They looked almost human, actually, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and faces that could have walked down any street on Earth without drawing stares. But their eyes held something ancient, something that had seen things humanity couldn't imagine. The images showed the predecessor civilization at its height. Thousands of worlds connected by technology that made current galactic travel look like horseback riding. Cities that floated in clouds, ships that crossed between galaxies in days, medical science that had conquered death itself. They were gods walking among the stars. "They had everything," Jake whispered. "They had too much," the architect corrected. "Observe." The hologram shifted, showing predecessor scientists working on something massive in deep space. A structure that dwarfed planets, built in the darkness between galaxies. They were studying something Jake's eyes couldn't quite focus on, something that hurt to look at even in recorded images. "What is that thing?" The predecessors called it the consumer. An entity that exists in the spaces between dimensions. It feeds on civilizations that grow too advanced, too visible. Like a predator drawn to light in darkness. Jake's blood ran cold as he watched the hologram. The thing, the consumer, moved through space in ways that defied physics. It touched predecessor colonies, and entire worlds went dark. Not destroyed. Erased. As if they had never existed at all. The predecessors tried to fight it, Jake said, watching their massive fleets engage the entity. They must have had weapons that could stop it. They threw everything they had at the consumer. Weapons that could crack planets. Technology that bent reality itself. Nothing worked. Every attack only drew more attention. The consumer grew stronger, feeding on their advanced technology like fuel to a fire. The hologram showed predecessor worlds falling one by one. Billions dying as the entity spread across their empire. Jake watched civilizations that had lasted millions of years crumble in decades. The predecessors were losing, and they knew it. They faced a choice, the architect continued. Extinction or transcendence. They chose to ascend to a higher dimensional plane where the consumer could not follow. They ran away, Jake said quietly. They survived. But they could not bear to leave the galaxy defenseless. The consumer would eventually find other civilizations, other species reaching for the stars. The cycle would repeat forever. The hologram showed the final days of the predecessor civilization. The last of their people gathering in chambers like this one, preparing for transcendence. But before they left, they did something Jake hadn't expected. They began editing genetic codes of primitive species across the galaxy, planting seeds that would only activate millions of years later. You put the inheritance key in our DNA, Jake said, understanding dawning. In human DNA specifically. Not just humans. 17 species across the galaxy carry the markers. But humans were the primary backup. Your species evolved far from the consumer's attention, on a world so unremarkable it would never draw the entity's focus. Jake felt sick. We weren't chosen because we're special. We were chosen because we're nobody. Correct. The inheritance was never a gift. It is a responsibility and a warning. The tomb complexes are not treasure vaults. They are armories and strategic databases for a war that never ended. The hologram zoomed out, showing the galaxy from above. 4 to 7 points of light marked the locations of the tomb complexes. And at the galaxy's edge, in the dark spaces beyond the rim, something massive stirred. The consumer, waiting. It's still out there, Jake breathed. It never left. It simply waits for civilizations to reach the threshold where they become visible to it. The current galactic civilization is approaching that threshold. In perhaps 500 of your years, maybe less, the consumer will notice. And when it does, what happened to the predecessors will happen again. The tomb shook violently as a particularly large explosion hit the shields above. The Dominion was intensifying their attack. Jake could hear the sounds of ground troops fighting in the tunnels outside the chamber. The Dominion does not know about the consumer, the architect said. None of the current civilizations do. The predecessors erased all records before transcending. They believed knowledge of the threat would only accelerate the timeline, make species advance faster in attempts to defend themselves. Which would just draw the consumer's attention sooner, Jake finished. Exactly. You now face the same choice the predecessors did. Accept the inheritance and reveal the truth, risking panic and accelerated advancement. Or keep the secret and let civilizations continue in ignorance until the consumer arrives. Jake looked at Dr. Watson, who stood frozen, having heard everything through her monitoring equipment. Her face showed the same horror he felt. This wasn't just about ancient technology or political power. This was about the survival of every living thing in the galaxy. The chamber doors exploded inward. Dominion soldiers poured through, their weapons raised. At their head walked General Thel himself, his armor scorched from battle but his eyes burning with determination. Enough of this charade, Thel growled, pointing a massive weapon at Jake. You will surrender the inheritance to the Dominion, or I will take it by force. You don't understand what you're asking for, Jake said, his voice steady despite his fear. This isn't about power or glory. It's about survival. Then we will survive as we always have. Through strength and dominance. Thel stepped toward the central control panel. The architect will obey the rightful rulers of this galaxy. He placed his hand on the crystalline interface, attempting to access the tomb's systems. Immediately, red warning lights flashed throughout the chamber. The architect's voice boomed with a fury Jake hadn't heard before. Genetic markers, rejected. Psychological profile, incompatible. This entity demonstrates dominance patterns consistent with consumer attraction factors. Access denied. Energy arced from the interface, throwing Thel backward. He hit the ground hard, smoke rising from his armor. His soldiers helped him up, their weapons now trained on the architect's holographic projectors. Your aggression, your certainty and your superiority, your hunger for conquest, Jake said, finally understanding. Those are exactly the traits that draw the consumer's attention. The predecessors didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because they thought like you do. Thel's expression twisted with rage and something else. Fear, maybe. Because on some level, he understood that Jake was right. The standoff in the tomb chamber stretched like a pulled wire ready to snap. Dominion soldiers kept their weapons trained on Jake while General Thel climbed to his feet, fury radiating from every movement. Outside, the battle continued to rage, explosions echoing through the mountain like distant thunder. Jake stood at the control interface, his hand resting on the crystalline surface that had just rejected Thel. He could feel the architect's presence humming through the system, waiting for his decision. The weight of 50,000 years pressed down on his shoulders. The fate of billions hung on what he did next. Dr. Watson moved closer, her voice barely a whisper. Jake, whatever you're thinking, think carefully. Every government in the galaxy is watching this right now. I know, Jake said. Then louder, addressing everyone in the chamber and knowing his words were being broadcast across space, I accept the inheritance. The tomb responded instantly. Light flooded through every surface as the architect's systems fully activated. Holographic displays materialized around Jake, showing the locations of all 47 tomb complexes. He could feel information flowing into his mind, not overwhelming but there, accessible whenever he needed it. The collective knowledge of an entire civilization, organized and waiting. But, Jake continued, his voice cutting through the noise, I'm not keeping it to myself. And I'm not giving it to any one government or species. Thel took a threatening step forward. You have no authority to make that decision. Actually, according to every test your own scientists ran, I have all the authority. Jake pulled up the holographic interface, his maintenance worker instincts making the complex alien technology feel natural. The predecessors left this inheritance for whoever proved capable of handling it. Not the strongest. Not the most advanced. The most capable of cooperation. He pressed a command, and throughout the galaxy, the other 46 tomb complexes began to activate. On every world where a tomb stood, ancient systems came to life, their protective shields lowering, their doors opening for the first time in millennia. I'm opening all of them, Jake announced. Every tomb, every piece of technology, every scrap of knowledge. Available to everyone. But with conditions. The chamber erupted in shouts. Thel roared in outrage. Even Dr. Watson looked shocked. But Jake kept going, his fingers moving across the controls with growing confidence. Condition 1, no single species gets exclusive access. If you want predecessor technology, you work with others. Share research. Share results. The architect will monitor all tomb activities, and any civilization that tries to hoard knowledge gets cut off. You're giving away humanity's advantage, someone shouted from the communication feed. We don't have an advantage, Jake shot back. We have a responsibility. And if we try to keep this to ourselves, we'll end up just like the predecessors did. Alone, afraid, and facing something we can't beat. He pulled up the holographic image of the consumer, that terrible entity lurking at the galaxy's edge. Everyone in the chamber went silent. The image transmitted to every ship in orbit, to every government watching the broadcast. This is what the predecessors were running from, Jake explained. It's called the consumer, and it feeds on advanced civilizations. The more powerful you become, the more attention you draw. The predecessors had technology that could remake reality, and it wasn't enough. They lost. The silence stretched. Jake could see the horror on Dr. Watson's face, the calculation in Thel's eyes, the fear spreading through everyone watching. Condition 2, Jake continued, we prepare together. The architect has defensive strategies, early warning systems, and technology specifically designed to fight this thing. But it only works if we coordinate. Every major civilization contributes ships, resources, and personnel. We build a galactic defense network, or we all die separately. Why should we believe any of this? Thel demanded, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. This could be a human trick to gain control. Because the architect confirms everything, Jake said simply. The eye's voice filled the chamber, broadcasting the same data Jake had seen. Historical records of the predecessor collapse. Sensor data showing the consumer's current location. Projections of when it might detect current galactic civilization. The evidence was overwhelming. Undeniable. And terrifying. Condition 3, Jake said, his voice softer now. We do this smart. No rushing to develop super weapons that draw attention. No racing to outbuild each other. We use predecessor technology to improve lives first. Medicine, agriculture, clean energy. Things that help people without screaming advanced civilization into the void. He looked directly at Thel. Your Dominion is welcome to participate. But only if you work with others. No more claiming superiority. No more threatening smaller species. The galaxy can't afford that kind of division anymore. Thel's expression cycled through rage, pride, and finally, reluctant understanding. He was a military man. He understood existential threats. The Dominion's Council will need to discuss this. You've got 72 hours, Jake said. After that, the tombs redistribute their resources to civilizations that are cooperating. The architect's rules, not mine. Over the next weeks, Jake watched his impossible plan somehow take shape. It wasn't smooth. The Dominion nearly walked away twice. 3 smaller civilizations tried to secretly raid tombs for exclusive technology and got shut out by the architect. Dozens of diplomatic incidents flared up as old enemies were forced to work side by side. But slowly, grudgingly, it happened. The first joint research team assembled at the Varash 7 tomb, scientists from 12 different species sharing data and resources. The Dominion contributed their military expertise to defensive planning. A species called the Chorus, masters of communication technology, began linking the early warning networks across the galaxy. Humans found their niche quickly. They weren't the strongest or the smartest, but they were adaptable. Human engineers worked alongside alien technicians, finding practical applications for predecessor systems. Human diplomats became mediators, their youth on the galactic stage making them neutral parties in ancient disputes. And Jake? Jake went back to being a mechanic. Sort of. 6 months after the inheritance activation, he stood in a repair bay on a space station orbiting the Varash 7 tomb. But instead of fixing air filters, he was teaching a young engineer from the Chorus civilization how to maintain a predecessor energy conduit. The key is not to overthink it, Jake explained, showing her where to place the calibration tool. These systems are 50,000 years old, but the basics are the same as any engine. Power goes in, work comes out, heat gets vented. Just bigger scale. The Chorus engineer, her name a series of harmonic tones Jake had learned to approximate, hummed thoughtfully. Your species has only encountered this technology for months, yet you understand it intuitively. How? Jake shrugged. We're good at figuring out how things work, I guess. Humans have been taking stuff apart and putting it back together since we figured out tools were a thing. Through the bay windows, he could see the first joint species warship being constructed. It was massive, incorporating design elements from dozens of different civilizations and powered by carefully managed predecessor technology. The ship would be the flagship of the new Galactic Defense Initiative, and it represented something unprecedented in known history, genuine cooperation on a massive scale. Dr. Watson appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. She'd been appointed as Earth's liaison to the Architect project, coordinating human involvement in the tomb research. Jake, you've got another request for an interview. This one's from the Galactic Historical Archive. Tell them no, Jake said, not looking up from the conduit he was calibrating. Same as the last 50 interviews. They're offering quite a lot of money. Don't need it. I've got a job. Watson smiled. You could have any job in the galaxy. Fleet Admiral. Government position. CEO of any major corporation. You're literally the most important human alive. And yet here I am, teaching people how to change interdimensional oil filters. Jake finished the calibration and stepped back, satisfied. This is where I'm useful. Out there, with all the politics and attention, I just screw things up. An alarm chimed softly throughout the station. Not an emergency, but a notification. Jake pulled up the display, and his breath caught. The early warning network, still in its testing phase, had detected something at the galaxy's edge. A ripple in spacetime. A disturbance that matched the consumer's signature. It was subtle, barely there. The entity was still light years away, not moving toward them, just stirring. Like something shifting in its sleep. But the network had worked. They detected it. For the first time in galactic history, civilization wasn't blind to the threat lurking in the dark. Jake watched the data scroll across the screen, then looked out at the warship being built, at the scientists from a dozen species working together in the research facilities below, at the network of tombs now active across the galaxy. It wasn't much. They had hundreds of years of work ahead of them, maybe more. The consumer was still out there, still dangerous, still inevitable. But they weren't facing it alone. And they weren't facing it unprepared. "Hey, architect," Jake said to the air. "Yes, air." "Stop calling me that. Just Jake is fine." "As you wish, just Jake." Jake laughed despite everything. 50,000 years old, and the AI had developed a sense of humor. "Do you think we can actually win this? When the consumer finally comes, do we have a chance?" The architect was quiet for a moment. The predecessors believed they had to be perfect to survive. They were wrong. Perhaps your species' greatest strength is that you accept imperfection and adapt to it. So that's a maybe. That is a possibility. Which is more than the predecessors had. Jake nodded slowly. A possibility. A chance. That was all anyone could ask for, really. He turned back to his work, showing the chorus engineer how to test the conduit's power flow. Outside, the stars shone cold and distant, and in the dark spaces between them, something ancient waited. But for the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy was preparing to fight back. And it all started because a mechanic had sneezed at exactly the wrong, or exactly the right, moment.